It's just people starting. So,
We're live.
all right, so we're live. Welcome to the Smoke Pit. My name is Katie Torbach. I am the president of 5051 Vets, and I will let Rory introduce himself.
How's it going, y'all? Sorry, I was swallowing a drink. Rory, 5051 Vets comms director, Army vet, North Carolina, and then I will pass it over to Kaylee.
I'm Kate Peterson. I am running for the U.S. House of Representatives in Idaho's first congressional district. And if you're looking at Idaho, it's all from the Canadian border to the Nevada border, all of north and central Idaho, and then the southwest. Working class mom of two, I started the campaign in 2022. So I've been trying to organize in a very, very rural district for the last 5 years, trying to create a platform that works for everyday working class people like me and my family. I'm excited to be here tonight.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And before we get into your campaign, I want to actually know who you are as a human. So can you tell us more about yourself, your family, your upbringing, what your life looks day to day in your district?
Yeah, I think I'm realizing now as a congressional candidate that my childhood was unusual because it's hard to kind of explain it all in a sound. So I grew up as a Marine, left the Marines, went to Army National Guard. So I grew up in Groton, Connecticut. My dad at the Marine Brantford, technically at the mechanic shop next to the Armory. And then my mom, super hardworking, she raised me as a single mom for the most part. So she worked 2 to 3 jobs at a time. So I was a complete latchkey kid in the 90s. I started working really, really young. So I started working at local businesses when I was 10. And I split my childhood going back and forth between Groton, Connecticut, and Eagle, Idaho, where I now raise my family and where I'm running the campaign from. On my Idaho side is old school Republican farmers. So we all still live on the land that's the family for 100 years. The area is up a lot. There aren't a lot of farm fields left. We are actually the last bit undeveloped land. So my 86-year-old father I grew up with is still out fixing his fences. And my parents and whole family live within a mile of us. I was, I worked every retail and fast food and service my teen years. I often had 2 to 3 jobs. I graduated early. I was a super nerdy speech and debate kid. So debate was my entire life. I graduated early, was working by the time I was 18, and that's when I got my first real foray into politics. I started as a volunteer. I started organizing. I became an advocate and public speaker for diverse youth in Idaho's foster and school systems. And then I ended up managing a local campaign. And I think that's where I really fell in love with local organizing, and especially the local political process. Life was really difficult there for a while. And so I kind of found myself starting over by the time I was 18 and 19. I ended up meeting my husband when I was 19 or 20. We were total babies back then. We were almost 17 years now. We have a 13-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. We started from the bottom. My husband started at 16 years as a temp mover. And for the last 17 years, he's built it up. He had his own crew. He was a lumper. He has his own little moving company that he runs here in Idaho. And for me, I got back involved in politics after raising my kids. We were foster parents. And once my kids were a little bit older, back to college, I was double major political science and criminal justice. I was recruited to run for Congress back in 2022. So it really was just trial by fire, getting thrown into a district where they could not find somebody who was willing to run at the federal level. I was a Democrat because there's no money in it. 75% of the population immediately thinks you're the opposition if you have a D next to your name. A lot of trying to overcome those assumptions. And there's, a valid reason. The Democratic Party hasn't really been active in places like Idaho for 30 years. So rural districts like ours were left behind. And I started a campaign with just me and my Toyota hybrid that gets great mileage driving up and down the district. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the communities. I get to work with people who know the community inside and out better than anyone else. And I get to try and find the policy and the legislative solutions that work for them. And then how myself as a candidate can advocate and try and get those policies at the forefront of what we're talking about in Idaho politics. So yeah, that's kind of the rundown. I mean, it's quite a bit these last 35 years, but that's in a nutshell.
No, I love it because I always do some research into our candidates we have on here. I didn't, and it went awry, so now I do a lot of research into people. And so you did state that this is not your first run. So what keeps pulling you back? Like, what keeps pulling you back to run in the same, district? Do you see that there's like a shift in opinion happening in the district more towards the Democrat Party or just away from the Republican Party?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. So for me, when I started in 2022, it was depressing how little had actually been done statewide. Most of the counties I went to didn't have a local Democratic Party. They didn't have candidates running at the local level. There were no contacts to reach out to try and organize when I went to these areas. But the vast majority of people I talked to, whether they were Republican, independent, unaffiliated, libertarian, or Democrat, were extremely unhappy with the way that things have been. Wages have stagnated. There's very little affordable and accessible health care. Our federal agencies are operating on a shoestring budget and they're failing. And then the government is pointing at them for failing. Education is incredibly difficult as rural areas. And so none of them were happy with it, but there wasn't anything better in its place. There wasn't anybody else out there speaking anything outside of what the foundation already was telling these rural communities. And the truth is, I realized immediately chance to flip the district in one cycle, but so much success. So I think because I'm a debate kid, also I think growing up with a military father, you have a certain thick skin, so I'm able to tolerate quite a bit more than maybe some of my traits. But we've had so much success. When I started, I actually started by hosting Republican town halls in some of the most conservative towns. So I would go in areas like Lewiston or Ribbons, and I would to come question the Democrat. I'd say, hey, let me know what worries you about the D next to my name. Tell me what you from government. And I knew that was I knew I was successful in that because the Idaho GOP sent me this letter trying to promote events towards Republican voters. And we were getting press, and it was great because I was hearing from Republican voters who made assumptions on the D next to my name and who are people who have come through town D next to their name. And we got to know each other on a personal level and just work policy out. And we made so much inroads, but I knew that no willing to come in and work 24/7 4 years with no income to try and build something to be successful. And I'm really grateful. I love good government and I love policy. I mean, this is the work that I actually enjoy doing. I love to travel. I love arguing good policy with people on the ground. So yeah, I knew that I was willing to commit multiple cycles until we could flip it. But what's interesting is that in 22 and 24, I knew we couldn't be successful. I never made the promise we could win. I'm grateful that we built this last 4 years because this cycle is a really unique opportunity. We have decriminalizing marijuana on the ballot, and we have reproductive rights on the ballot. And then we have 4 years where we've built relationship and trust, our AFWs, our Grange halls, our local union boards, like these local communities who know me now as Kaylee and not some Democrat on a ballot. So we're in a place where we can be successful no matter the letter, just based on a candidate proving their own kind of worth and mettle in these communities.
I commend you for long-term strategy work. I am also a policy nerd and talk to people on the ground about policy, especially Republicans. I call it my Lord's work. Because I grew up conservative Catholic, and I am still a registered Republican. And so I try to appeal to other Republicans, like to their senses of this is not our party. like, this doesn't follow any of the tenets of our party. And so, yeah, no, I commend you for doing that in such a deeply red part of your state, because I did look at your voting like demographics and things of that nature. So, I commend you of building that. I think it's fascinating. And we actually have a veteran in our group that lives in your district. And so, yeah, it was one of the reasons I reached out to you, because I always try to reach out to people that are running local to people in our group. And yeah, we got one in your district in Idaho. So, yeah, but I do want to transition into something way more heavy, because it has been the talk of everybody today of what happened in Minnesota. Earlier today, a Veterans Affairs employee named Alex Preddy was killed during a federal operation in Minneapolis. As veterans, we do not take this lightly at all. I have seen it blow up across many chats I'm in with veterans from across the country, and we see the seriousness and the continued violence. So when you first heard that this happened, what went through your mind? Because we just saw it a week ago.
I think it was my biggest fear when I started running this campaign. It's something that we talk about, like this abstract idea of somebody breathing our constitution, these abuses of power. And I think when we saw the ICE agents originally in these communities, our biggest fear was one, they're not operating standards as law enforcement. They are not operating under any standards that would be acceptable to any national organization. And I think when we lost Brittany Nicole Good, there's immediately this devastation that this was preventable. Any elected leader, anybody in any position of leadership would have seen this coming. And all of a sudden, we see not only does this tragedy happen, but then we see administration that doctors afterwards. That we're seeing AI-generated images trying to change the narrative. We see the apps and technology that are being used by ACE agents, the database of supposed domestic terrorists, which are observers and protesters operating under our constitutional framework. So then when we watch what happened in Minneapolis, and obviously I can't help but just try and watch every single. I think that especially those on the ground in Minneapolis deserve to be seen, and I think that we need to take information in, and we need to act as immediately as we can, because this is an emergency. We've never ever seen this kind of abuse of power at the executive level. We've never seen our constitution and our judicial and our legislative push to this level. And so honestly, I'm sad. Like, I'm afraid for my children and the country that they're going to grow up with. I'm angry. And I don't want to sound like but I have my red flag on the shelf. I know what to watch your loved ones get deployed for this type of country and democracy and freedom. And I work with our veterans, and I work with these incredible people on the ground who are killing themselves, often for no money, no resources, no support, just trying to improve their community and protect their community. ICE agents that we know are getting paid $6 figure salaries with $50,000 without no training and no oversight and no expectation to take the life of somebody as incredible as Alex. All I keep seeing is how this was, how much he cared for our veterans. He's an ICU nurse, a man who showed up in his community every possible chance he could, and he was there in the streets of Minneapolis trying to protect and observe and watch. So it's a tragedy, and I think it makes me angry and scared, and want to organize a times more and 1,000 times harder than I am to try to make sure we have a national framework to push back against the kind of tyranny that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. I mean, for a lot of us, the VA isn't, some bureaucracy. It's a place where we go like when we're hurt, struggling, or just trying to survive. And so I've seen veterans across the country today, both sides of the aisle, take this extremely, extremely hard. Not that we took Renee Good any less hard, but what we see is the decimation of the VA as is, and now you're out here murdering VA employees. And in both cases, civilians ended up dead. And do you think the public's being asked to accept too much on faith when deadly force is being used?
Yes, 100%. Well, and here's the frustrating thing is I think we noticed 10 years ago that there was this breakdown in how public was receiving information. And I talk about this in Idaho all the time because it would be broad people would have heard or seen that mess because we all get our information relatively same kind of news sources, these like standards, the FCC fairness and all these. Now there's this down, so they split that or there's a hyper-partisan divide, and everybody's getting from one side, or not based on whether it warrants that trust or how accurate it is or where it's coming from, but whether it's coming from somebody you believe and somebody who already believes what you believe. So when we know are doctored, we know these narratives are doctored because we can see it with our own two eyes. That's the beauty about Minneapolis' organization is they have made sure that there is now a corner of their city that is filmed at all times. And it is incredibly impressive. And I think the rest of the country needs to take notes on well executed and what Minneapolis' response to this. But yeah, the public's and what frustrates me, right, is obviously military kid. I originally went to school for original plan criminal justice to work with law enforcement, work in law enforcement, and pride for law enforcement worked and manipulated into the support of this kind of faithful force. It's really hard to watch, and it's why I think in that position I'm trying to build trust back with communities so that they have somebody that they can trust, telling them the reality of the situation, can bring them into the fold, or at least to the table. And that's my hope.
Yeah, and I, personally, I come from a law enforcement family. My uncles were FBI, my grandfather was FBI, and most veterans, right? Like, we believe in law and order, right? Like, most of us do. I know a few anarchist veterans, but most of us believe somewhat law and order. But, what's going on isn't it? Right. And I was talking probably an hour and a half ago before we started this to a friend of ours in Germany. She is a MILF spouse. And I've known this person for a long time. We advocated together for military sexual trauma after the murder of Vanessa Guillen in 2020. So we've known each other for quite a few years now. And she didn't know what all was going here. Right? Because their news is filtered overseas. And so I had to give her like a brutal reality check of what is happening in Minneapolis currently of, the 5-year-old child, Liam. We all know his name now. We all know that 5-year-old child's name. We now know 2 citizens have been murdered openly. And documented across social media for the world to see. And I just don't think people understand the gravity of the situation. And I agree with you. The resistance there is how it should look, is that's what accountability looks like. is cameras everywhere, because these are crimes. Like these are crimes. Let's call them what they are. And these are criminals committing them. And so I applaud all of our brothers and sisters in Minnesota doing it. I live in Jacksonville, Florida, and as Rory said, Rory lives in North Carolina. But just like this week, we saw the arrest of William Kelly. We know him, and he's a veteran, combat vet, and got arrested. The Airbnb he was in was raided. He was arrested for the protest in the church using a law that was made for the Klan. And so, you see all of these just blatant disregard for how government works. And so I started this, chat this way because we went from your personal story into a real world tragedy, and it's not an accident because a lot of what you're running on comes down to service, trust, and accountability. And so I want to zoom out a little bit. And even though you didn't serve, right? You said you came from a military family, and you're clearly running because you care about public service. So what does service mean to you personally?
It's one of the pieces that I think is missing from modern politics. I don't know, for me, growing up, maybe it's just because I was a history political nerd. Connecticut, we have the Revolutionary Era field. We have really the forming of the country. And so then for me, growing up, I still remember writing the Clinton administration, 8 years old in 1998, about how they handled COVID. Like, that's the kind of small child I was. That's the kind of person. It's just, it is. And you grow up in a family, and especially in a family like my mom's side of the family, it's very much about duty and responsibility. The farming side of my family, growing up, it was about how we take care of this land and the history of it, and the proper upkeep, and how we take care of our community. And it was all this kind of sense of respect and integrity. And my dad's side, obviously, you see what it actually takes when somebody serves the country and then comes back and has to deal with the fallout of that. And as a child of somebody trying to help a parent through this really difficult situation, you see the cost. You see the cost of what it takes to send somebody overseas. And so for me, I think it's kind of this perfect storm where I started getting really frustrated at watching people get elected to the highest point in our government with this tremendous amount of trust and responsibility and obligation, but not act with any of it. And in my race specifically, I'm running against somebody who's not a good person. There are Republicans in my state I agree with, and I respect, because I really believe they're working as hard as they can. I don't agree with some of their behaviors, but they're trying to help their community. I am running against somebody who speaks so badly about the people that they're supposed to sue, sells out rural communities for the highest dollar, and then takes luxury vacation. Most important legislation. I still remember my father going through aggressive cancer at the VA hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, around the time Fulcher voted against the PACT Act, and even put out a quote about it. So for me, I still remember when they recruited me, I didn't think there was a chance that they were going to ask me to run for Congress, because I look at myself as, I'm a 30-year-old working class mom. I don't come from pedigree or status. I'm not independently wealthy. I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I honestly didn't believe anybody would want me to run for office. But then when I started the campaign, I realized all people wanted was accountability and transparency and trust. And that felt like such a tremendous trust that they were putting in me, and a responsibility and an obligation that I want to set the standard to, because I want voters to expect that from the people that they elect. And so it's why I work as hard as I do, and I try to be as transparent as possible. And I've never tried to be a polished politician. I often talk publicly about how nerdy I am, about the fact that I've worked almost every fast food job, and I that's my, but the responsibility, because I look at the potential that our government has and the potential that the last 150 years have. Our Constitution is such an incredible document. I mean,
Yes.
literally set the example, the three frameworks, the three balanced branches of government. These are all miraculous. And I think that we should always be constantly trying to perfect that promise. And we look at our government right now, like everyone's forgotten that incredible opportunity that they have and the trust that they have. And so I don't know why I feel it as much as I do, but it's something I hope we can bring back to government.
I'm a real fan of the Constitution. And so and so are most veterans, right? Because we took an oath to it. And I tell people all the time, right? People need to read the Constitution more, because most of the problems that we have currently in government can be, solved by just following the Constitution as written. And so I do know one of your platforms, you were talking about term limits. And so most people don't know, but I know you're a nerd. I'm a nerd. And so you know that there is a Supreme Court case that says term limits are unconstitutional. So the only way to put term limits in, there's two ways in theory. Either the DNC and RNC can put it in their charter, right? Or we have to amend the Constitution. And are you down for a constitutional amendment for term limits? And what does that look like?
Term limits were one of the harder things for me to justify, because for every pro, there is a con, right? For every bad politician that's been in office for 30 years too long, that's completely sold out and is not doing. There are really amazing elected officials who do try to serve their communities. And so it's this kind of mixed bag where we put in term limits, but then I look at the biggest obstacle we face, and it is the amount of money that seated members of Congress, like for instance, my opponent has done nothing for the state. He has no power, he has passed no bills, and yet he is nearly $1 million every campaign cycle at all, just because of his corporate connection, special interests he worked with, the Heritage Foundation, the Freedom Fund, all of these different interests, right? So the incumbents already such an unfair advantage. And then the other side of that is that a lot of the PACs that agree with me, the big interests like Micron and local employers and federal agencies that do like my campaign and platform, can't risk working with me publicly because they don't want to injure the relationship that they have with a member of Congress, just trying to protect what little influence or sway that they might have with that elected official. And so this is where we really break down why the government isn't working for everyday people anymore. And so I'm trying to look at how can we address this as quickly as possible and undo a lot of that misinformation, the money that goes out in misinformation campaigns, influence. And for me, term limits is the way that we can put that into check. So for me, it would be 3 terms in the U.S. House, 2 terms in the U.S. Senate. And I would be open to a constitutional amendment. My hope is, though, and what I'm seeing, I think nationally, especially over the last 4 years, has been this massive movement of just pissed class people who are just done with the 2-party system and ready for candidates who don't care about the party politics anymore. I'm a Democrat because I'm in Idaho, and the Democratic Party, their platform here is very much working class focused. But the DNC does not acknowledge me. They've actually ghosted me 3 times. I've tried to reach out to get them to do rural progressive politics better. Listen, we're having success here. I would like to talk to the DNC about maybe ways that you can improve. They actually set up meetings and no cancel on me. So like, I have no allegiance to the DNC, financially support my campaign. The only allegiance I have to the D next to my name is the fact that I call myself a Democrat. And that's what I'm seeing people look at themselves and who are willing to come together to actually find some kind of solution. whether that's the R&D and the DNC, or whether that's a constitutional amendment that we organize from the ground up, and hopefully try to implement over our plan. Either way, I think I'd be on board.
Yeah, I mean, we're here for term limits. I'm not sure that we came to a like whole consensus on the actual number, because we are a nonpartisan group of veterans, and so we discuss policy all the time openly with each other, because we have veterans from all different ideologies in our group. So yeah, we're here for it, just because of what you're talking about, right? Is the deep entrenched money in politics. As a matter of fact, we are partners with Money Out of Politics, which is another veteran ran org. Have you heard of them? Have you taken their pledge? And would you like to?
I would % love to. It's funny because it's really the way that I come across a lot of times luck. I either find an organization or somebody's me or I get an email, but that is 100% what I'm on board for. So I would love to take that pledge because it sounds exactly working with groups like Citizen Impeach and the Term Limits Pledge, and, whatever groups there are that I can network with, because I think we're stronger together than just each of us working on our own little island.
Oh yeah, we're connected with Citizens Impeachment as well. Because coalition matters, right? Like coalition building across the country. Because at this point, like you said, it's not really about party, right? People are just sick and tired of everything that's going on, the unaffordability, the federal government overreach, like the endless wars, starving children, and you can go on and on and on with a myriad list of problems in this country. And, there is a need and a want for, just conversations across the aisle of like, how do we fix this? Like, can we not have 50-50 votes every time? Like you have to get together and talk. And so, I'm glad to hear that. I'm like, that's shitty about the DNC. I'll say it. Fuck them. That's wrong. Because rural America matters the most when we're talking about, flipping seats and things of that nature. And rural America matters to the veteran community. And so we'll talk about veteran healthcare. It's a good caveat. VA healthcare in rural communities is at risk. And I know this because even though I live in Jacksonville, which is a very large city, I choose to go to a rural VA that's about an hour west of here in Lake City. And it services the rural communities between Jacksonville, Florida, and Tallahassee. And what I learned is that the rural VA resources are being reallocated to larger VA systems. And so how is that working within your district for your veterans, like the rural healthcare, especially within the VA system?
Yeah, it's devastating here. To me, and personally, I think it's intentional. My opponent, so Fulcher has talked pretty openly about thinking that the free markets should handle every issue, including VA. So he's saying, he's talking about privatizing VA healthcare, which we all know it because we're rational, common sense individuals. Our private healthcare is a disaster. It's not even affordable to the rest of us, never mind the VA. So honestly, healthcare in the state it's already in ruins. The strictest abortion legislation in the country, which started back in 2022, decimated our healthcare system as a whole. We lost 43% of our OBGYNs. A lot of our physicians retired or left the state. So the state of Idaho, just regular physicians and healthcare, would need to hire 1,400 doctors just to get up to the national standard of being able to take care of the people that already live here. And then on top of that, we are such a large district. I mean, from one side of my district to the other, it's 10.5 to a 12-hour drive. So our rural areas already, they're having to drive right of ways just to get VA healthcare, and that's just. But then you have the cuts that have just come through. So outside of the VA, you have a $150 billion cut, and then they're bragging about putting $50 billion back into rural healthcare, which means that we're at net $100 billion loss. In our VA, which was already, and I don't want to talk about it at the VA because Idaho's VA is actually remarkable, considering how little they work with. Our VA does a fantastic job. They're incredibly responsive. The wait times are low, especially compared to the national standard. Our VA employees are phenomenal, but they were already operating on a shoestring budget with not enough employees to cover the needs, especially for rural veterans who are driving in from these smaller towns. I haven't heard about the reallocation of funds from our smaller rural kind of satellite bases, but that's something that I would need to check into, because even our Boise VA is struggling. Any kind of reallocation is going to devastate. And you're looking at now veterans having to drive an half for care to then having to drive 7 to 8 hours for care. And with the VA, immediate treatment is very often necessary. So that's very terrifying. Our servicemen and women in the state.
Yeah, so we're not a massive fan of community care, right? Because we think it's like the first step in privatizing the VA. Although, in your situation, in your district, it kind of makes sense, right? Like, not the privatization, the community care aspect, because asking veterans to drive 7 to 8 hours to a VA is just bullshit and crazy, right? Because even for Jacksonville, right, for a large city, we don't have a ER. Like, for the VA, it's weird. We have like 2 very large VA clinics here, and neither one is an ER. You have to drive to Lake City for the ER, which is an hour. But like, you could die within that hour if you need immediate care. And so I do think that there are special cases, such as in your district, where community care makes sense, where veterans can find local doctors. But I think in my instance, right, where I live in Jacksonville, it's a large city. We have 2 very large VAs. I don't think me going outside the system makes sense, right? It's like, why would I use community care? Now I'm just taking a spot in normal healthcare system. But I do worry about rural veterans and their healthcare. We do have quite a few in our group that live in like rural Oklahoma and places of that nature. And so, I would like to see more funds allocated, our group would, for the Veterans Health Administration. Also, one of the things we always chat about with candidates, I have a personal friend who has advocated for different therapies for PTSD for years. She lives in Arizona. She finally got a state law passed. Congrats to you, Crystal. We've been following it for years. She's advocated for this, and finally got passed at the state level for psychedelics microdosing for PTSD, which is their studies. Anywho, I don't know if you know this, at the VA, you can only get evidence-based therapies for PTSD. And so when those therapies run out, now what? And there's been quite a consensus among a lot of therapists around the country. It's we don't know. And so, in light of 22 veterans a day killing themselves, and we tracked, I think it was 18 last year that killed themselves at VAs across the country, we think it's about time that on a federal level, the VA open its doors to other therapies that might help veterans across the country. Are you willing to like kind of help us in that effort if elected?
Yeah. So first, I want to say yes, absolutely. And I want to talk about that more. But there's also this aspect that it's so frustrating being a data nerd, being looking at the information that we have, that our communities are dealing with this scarcity mindset. There's barely enough. And so we're constantly just trying to get a little bit more, a little bit more. But then I look at the defense budget that this country puts forward, and the fact that the vast majority of that, one, we have what, 2 billion unaccounted for in recent audits, but we also know such a vast amount of that is going to military contractors. It does not go back to servicemen and women. It does not go out into the field to make sure you're safe. It does not go into efficient systems that is protecting this country. It's going to private contractors. And then, like, for me, I'm always, people go, how are you going to pay for this? Where's that money going to come from? And then I look at the numbers, and our country pays out $768 billion in direct and indirect subsidies, tax cuts, and handouts just to the fossil fuel industry every single year. United Healthcare was being investigated for $80 billion of annual Medicaid fraud every single year. So there are massive amounts of our taxpayer dollars being fed to the most monopolized and powerful industries in the world. So I look at it and I don't think we should have to be fighting over scraps and trying to get one more program. I'm talking about bolstering these budgets in a way that hasn't been done in the last 250 years. I'm talking about massive restructuring and dismantling of where our current taxpayer dollars are going so that the VA is funded from A to Z. I want comprehensive care. I want to talk about, it's not just like, oh, if we have to drive an hour to 7 hours. I'm talking about massive hiring. And not only is that job opportunities for healthcare professionals, not only is that bolstering local economies, but it's also taking care of the veterans here in my state and nationally. So that's where I'm like, I care when it's necessary is great. I want to radically dismantle the system of the way that our government is currently working. And then obviously for me, so obviously I have some experience watching what my dad went through. And then I actually, on a personal level, not in anywhere near the same, have my own diagnosis. And so I'm very familiar with so many of the incredible therapies and have been for nearly 20 years. This was not a secret, right? This was an open secret about how useful psychedelics can be, ketamine can be, marijuana can be. These are all incredibly useful. And then I look at what our veterans often deal with as far as the prescriptions that they're forced to take, the therapies that they're limited to. And like you, I just think that it's just an obvious answer, right? Like it seems like it should be so obvious. And the reasons that we're not doing it seem to just be these misnomers, not based in any research or data or actual information, just based on, you know, kind of reefer madness from 50 years ago, you know? Yeah. So yeah, I am 100% on board. I'm talking about comprehensive, just inclusivity of all of these therapies that can be extremely helpful, and also funding them so that they are available to each and every serviceman and women.
I like that. We look at funding. We're also nerds. We look at the reallocation of funding all the time of like how can we afford better education, better healthcare for the greater society. And you know, the DoD audit is one of the first things we think should be done. And abolishing DHS. We just think that the overlap, right? Like there's so much overlap of what DHS does, and the Coast Guard can be put back where they belong under the DoD, and things of that nature, right? And with the expansion of funding that they asked for, or the president just kind of said he was going to give them, because that's not how that works either. You know, like we have two departments that have $2 trillion in funding that can be given to systems that need it, that can be bolstered, like the VA or other systems in the country to make all of our lives better. But no, staying in the healthcare realm, especially with the VA, right? I am very vocal that I am a military sexual trauma survivor. I have been in the advocacy space for years. One of the things and problems with the VA that we would like to see fixed, and we've been advocating for now for what year are we in? 6 years. Males are sexually assaulted more in the military than women, and it's not a talked about fact enough. But women, we're always willing to talk about it and pick up that battle. One of the things that we would like to see fixed for our male counterparts is they cannot claim sexual assault at the VA. And most people don't know that. Male sexual assault is classified as hazing. And so they cannot claim PTSD because of MST. And so we always ask every candidate, like, will you help us right that wrong for our male counterparts so that they can get the help they need? And the VA doesn't cut off their like help, right? They can still go to mental health and stuff like that. We're not saying that. What we are saying is on the benefits administration side, not the health side. There's two sides to the VA. Is that they cannot claim PTSD from MST. And it is denied because it's categorized as hazing. And we would like to see that changed. So will you help us in that fight if elected to change that wrong?
100%. 100%. And as violence is where my PTSD stems from, and a lot of my work has been in facilities trying to get people out of violent situations, both men and women. I know for me, I was actually really hopeful at how this conversation was going. I think that there was at a time a push towards allowing men to be really open with their experience and being able to label their trauma. And that was one of the hardest things to watch when Pete Hegseth got up on the stage, and the way that he was starting to talk about our military and about our men and about the trauma. And it wasn't, I don't know the specifics, and I don't want to pretend like I do, but I know that Pete Hegseth was working to remove, I think, some of the protections that were hard fought and won for victims of assault under the military. And so that's where this danger really comes in, because these are very, very real experiences. And so for me, it just feels like a bunch of tough guys, and they're not even tough guys. It looks like a bunch of weak men trying to play like tough guys who have no understanding of what the experiences are and what the actual needs are. And so for me, I am 100% committed to being as vocal about these issues as I can be, and to supporting whatever I can to make sure that it is classified the way that it should be, and that the resources are available for those who go through it.
And you are correct. So I'll give you a little bit of education. So in 2020, after the brutal murder of Vanessa Guillen on Fort Hood in Texas, women veterans around the country were over it, including myself and my vice president. And women veterans cross country stood together and stood up. It was the first time in this nation's history that we protested our treatment within the military, and we demanded change. And within the NDAA of 2021, parts of the Vanessa Guillen Act were submitted and passed. Now, with the erasure of DEI, for some reason, all of those protections have now been erased. And what I mean by that for people watching is, in the military, you had two different types of reporting, restricted and unrestricted. One was kept very close. You can go see medical professionals, the chaplain, things of that nature. That has been taken away. There is no billeting, like a line item for a job identifier for sharp reps, for people that you report to in the military for sexual assault. And just, I think it was 3 weeks ago now, I was talking to a young, very young female soldier on Fort Hood that I was connected to through a mutual friend and advocate, and it's continuing to happen, right? And so we would like to see the passage of the Vanessa Guillen Act or something like that. And I know that you will support it, but I will vocalize that is that we need protections yesterday. Because rape in the military is a generational issue. It is not a women's issue. It is an all of us issue. And enough is enough.
I will be as vocal about this issue as humanly possible. It's something that isn't even an equivocal. It's not something that it should just be an obvious answer. And the frustration is that I know about this stuff through my own research, through Vanessa's story, watching and reading those articles and hearing from her family. I don't know about any of these issues because it's something that our elected officials are talking about. I don't know about any of these issues because it's something that's being spoken about at the federal or state level. And so that's something, again, where I know that this is an area that I can do better than those who have come before me, as being as vocal about these issues as humanly possible. And I think once you get elected, that's where the real privilege comes from, is having that kind of platform. Right now, the media does not want to touch me. They're very careful because they don't see my race as competitive. They don't want to upset their link to Congress so that they can get interviews about what's happening. And that's, I think, where we've built a lot of relationships with media. We try and, put stories so that we can try and help local issues as much as possible. But once elected, I'm excited about the idea that I can use this platform to be as vocal and to advocate and to try and, like you said, build coalition around these really important issues. Because there's no reason this isn't something that should be talked about every single day until something is accomplished. And I think the fact that we're moving the needle backwards is devastating because we're listening to people that have no real experience in the military. They're just pretending like they do. So, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things we care about is accountability, and people just don't understand the lack of accountability in the military when it comes to sexual assault. And one of the greater things I learned about coalitions in that time frame, as we were activating women across the country, was activating moms. Right, is we were talking to Vanessa Guillen's family through intermediaries, the Women's Veterans Coalition. And, the military has its problems that civilians just don't know about, right? And we are an insular society within ourselves. And so we only make up 6.2% of the population, veterans in this country. And women veterans, smaller, because we make up 15% of the 6.2%. And so we activated civilians alike of, hey, like, these are your children that are being openly murdered on military bases. And so I think getting more civilians involved into military problems is the way to go. And one of the other things we're asking candidates is about the Ferris Doctrine. Do you know about the Ferris Doctrine?
I don't think so. Or if I do, it's not ringing any bells. So I would love to hear more about that.
So the Ferris Doctrine is this lovely piece of legislation that was passed in the 1950s that says basically that anybody that works for the federal government cannot sue the federal government for negligence. And one of the reasons that we find this problematic, there's a few, we got portions of it overturned in 2020. And what I mean by that is we can now sue the VA for medical negligence. Veterans can. But there is still the portion where active duty military members cannot sue the federal government for negligence. And we make the case that the other portion should be undone for accountability purposes. For sexual assault survivors, because the military has known it's been a problem for years and they have neglected to hold anybody accountable. But B, for training accidents. There's a lot of training accidents in the military that the family never finds out what happens, and often it's due to negligence. And so we would like to see legislators take action on this to hold the government accountable for things like training accidents, sexual assaults, and things of that nature, just because we feel that's one way to hold the government accountable. What do you think?
100%. I think it plays. I mean, when I say I want to radically dismantle these systems, it's about finding ways to have accountability in government at all levels. And so, the way I think about it is a little bit like the antitrust legislation that I very much support, that gets rid of all of these kind of basic immunities and these ways that we prevent any oversight or accountability, or for everyday people to take any power back against negligence. I feel the exact same way about the Ferris Doctrine, 100%. It's just, I mean, it's the same way I feel with ICE agents right now. You know, these are agents of the government, and then they're operating with absolutely no oversight. So yeah, I would completely undo the Ferris Doctrine. I want to rip open all of these systems and make them wholly accountable. And I think also when you get that level of transparency in this action in itself, all of a sudden, the rest of the country starts hearing these stories and realizing how bad this issue really was. And then we can build back these systems better. And that's what I talk about. And I think it might be the only silver lining to how destructive this administration has been to federal agencies, whether it's the Department of Education, whether it's all of these systems that they've really destroyed. Is my hope is that this movement of younger working class people who are going in, who really genuinely want to create better systems, we can build the systems back that actually work for everyday people like you and I, and not just for whatever system or agency that they're written for. So yeah, 100% I would support getting rid of the Ferris Doctrine.
Yeah, I mean, like, we've watched so much be dismantled in the last year. I don't think people understand the devastating effect, right? Is even if you were to hire all of those people back, institutional knowledge has been lost. And especially with federal jobs, it is not as easy to just reinstitute people into the federal government. There's process. And so we will see the ripple effect of this for generations, the decimation of our institutions in this country. And so I heard you say it, and so I want you to expand on it, because you are huge into banning stock trading.
Yes.
Why is that issue so important to you? Can you explain that to us?
One, it goes back to my nerd inclinations as a young child. It's the conflict of interest, right? It's the it's Jimmy Carter getting rid of his peanut farm, right? It's that kind of ideal, what we expect for people that get elected into office. I think you should have to remove every single potential conflict of interest. You should not have any of your money tied into any of the potential decisions that you could ever make at any time. And I think it's why we're in the situation that we're in now. We can watch it happening. Now there's Nancy Pelosi trackers and all of these different stock trades where you can just copy your congressman stock trades, because they know what's happening at an international level. They know what's happening with the trade markets, and they trade based on that instead of, yeah. So for me, I honestly would take it even further. I want to ban congressional stock trades, but I also want to cut off any potential conflicts of interest. What I look at with the Trump family and what they've been able to do, just by Donald Trump taking his name off of the Trump business, I mean, they've increased their profits by nearly $2 billion just in this year. We have their family doing all of these private deals internationally, and they directly contradict with the foreign policy and the trades that are being done with them. So yeah, I would go even further than banning congressional stock trades. Actually, and I don't know if this is funny story or not. So they now have a financial disclosure, which I'm incredibly excited about as a candidate. And I am a little bit behind on getting mine done because I don't know if everyone remembers when the GameStop incident happened. And it was kind of like the everyday, Reddit and was taking. And so I remember me and my husband jokingly saying, and I'm pretty sure we put like $50 into Dogecoin. Like we just did some silly little thing. But it's so ridiculous. And I didn't track it. I can't find where that account is. And I can't fill out this personal disclosure and not have accurate information because I don't want to lie on this federal form. So we've been trying to find like this $50 so that I can be accurate on my personal disclosure form. But yeah, I'm a huge believer that you did not get rich off of public service and government service. I don't think that's the purpose of it. So yeah, big fan of banning anything even remotely close to stock trades for Congress people.
Yeah, like we're here for it too, right? And plus we think it should be taken a little bit further as well. Especially with stocks, right? Because a lot of people think that, oh, well, they can just put it in a blind trust, or, I think that everybody in their immediate family should have to divest. Because you could just give it to your son or your child, like daughter, and then continue to generate familial wealth. And so I'm not sure what that looks like, but I do know that it needs to stop, because I think within the first year, what day are we at? Year and 24 days. Trump his family has made over $1 billion, and that's abhorrent and not what this country was about. And we learned from Jen Brothers, who's running in Pennsylvania. She reminds me so much of Katie Porter, who is my favorite legislator of all times. She informed us that 2% of Congress come from working class families. And I didn't know that the statistic was so low. Did you?
I say that statistic every single day in Idaho because none of them realize it. And especially in Idaho, there's this really awful kind of tradition where every single congressman from Idaho, whenever they're in the state, they all wear the Idaho vest and like rancher kind of outfit, the denim boots, and like my opponent will drive this old Ford truck. When I know for a fact this man lives in a luxury penthouse, he is driving luxury black cars when he's back in DC. He's staying at fancy resorts when he's in Idaho. This man likes to talk about growing up as a dairy farmer, but his family was also in commercial and luxury real estate. So yes, they had a dairy farm, but he also grew up incredibly wealthy and has been incredibly independently wealthy his whole life. So there is this kind of facade of the everyman that has become really popular. And when you're talking about cutting off familial, it kind of plays into my economic policy, because for me, on top of what I want to do to elected members of Congress and elected officials, is also how we dismantle kind of our entire economy and break down all of these loopholes for wealth that have allowed kind of the top 1% to hoard wealth and to move a lot of the money out of our local economies into the top. I mean, isn't it like $50 trillion has moved from working class economies to the top 1% in the last 40 years? And they're doing this through tax incentives and loopholes and tax havens and familial wealth and trusts and all of these ways that they're able to take money out of our economy and hoard. And so for me, it's not only just about elected officials and removing that and that conflict of interest, but also going towards our broader economy and taking out the abuses there, where the people who are benefiting the most from our labor and from our economy are contributing the least and the least accountable for the impacts that they have in our state.
I agree. I did a little bit of research into your district specifically, and housing costs are exploding in places like Boise and the Treasure Valley. So what do you think the push at the federal level should be to stabilize some of that?
It's gonna take a lot, right? And Idaho is interesting. What I didn't realize is that the housing market exploded everywhere. Because where I live in Eagle, it's right outside of Boise. So I live in what's the Treasure Valley. And even though I'm in a relatively rural area, the Treasure Valley as a whole is a more metropolis. There are, school choice and healthcare, and it's one of the more taking care of areas in the state. And when I started the campaign, I knew that housing costs, houses that used to go for 200,000 are now going for like 1.4 million. I mean, it exploded overnight. It was wild. But then I drive up the state and I'm in much smaller areas and they're experiencing that same market rush. And so now you have these really tiny communities where a lot of that workforce is lower income kind of workforce for seasonal areas. Also seeing these extreme housing prices. So the very first thing that I know we came almost immediately, and I'm frustrated because Trump didn't credit for it, but it was already a piece of legislation in committee, which was to ban investment firms and hedge funds from buying up single-family homes, because at the time they owned 26% of family homes in the U.S. market, and that was estimated to be 40% by the year 2030. But to be honest, I think with a bit of the recession and the housing market kind of stagnated, I thought that was accelerated. And then on top of that, you have these hedge funds and investment firms that buy up short-term rentals. So you have these really beautiful areas of the state where workforce can't find affordable housing because they're being used for Airbnbs. And they're not even for locals who own those properties, but instead for hedge funds that buy up these affordable houses. And when I talk to my rural constituents, they call it fiefdom because nobody's going to be able to compete with BlackRock. Like there isn't a single working class family in this state that can compete with these kind of firms. And then they buy these properties. Those properties will never go back on the market because they can afford to even lose money on these houses because of their portfolio. So they call it fiefdom because they buy up all of the actual homes in the area and then they rent those homes out. And we're now catching them for artificially inflating the rent prices and mortgage prices at the national level. So for me, the immediately banning large firms from buying up single-family homes is one. But then on top of that, we need way more oversight and transparency into these markets, and we need to regulate them because housing is a need. It is essential. It is not some privilege that only the few get. I'm a huge FDR fan. I actually have FDR's signature on my arm. If anybody ever sees me on stage, I get asked all the time what that is. And it's because of the Second Bill of Rights he proposed at his last state of address. And it made housing and education and food, and it talked about farmers' rights, and it was all of these things. Housing is required. It is an essential. It is the very least that you should be able to provide for yourself in this country. And so yeah, I think ripping apart those markets, transparency, oversight, antitrust legislation, breaking up the monopolies in those markets, banning the sale of single-family homes. And then also, this is one that doesn't get talked about as much, but how we are able to influence markets through tax incentives. Like right now in the US, there are massive tax breaks for like vacant commercial properties. If you look around and you're like, why are there these empty warehouses? It's because you get massive tax breaks for holding on to commercial vacant properties. Well, we can rewrite that tax law and incentivize building affordable housing and incentivize these areas where we need to grow the market. And that's something I think at the federal level that I'd like to look into.
I think that's interesting, especially the commercial point. I work in construction in my real life for a commercial company. And so I agree, like even here in Jacksonville, we have a lot of abandoned buildings that should be repurposed, especially to affordable housing. And, the Black Rocks and things of that nature should be stopped. As someone that works in the industry, there's a few reasons, right? Like the Black Rocks is one of them, as to why things are so expensive. One of the other reasons that I always like to talk about is labor. And labor costs are at an all-time high in my industry, in the construction industry. One of the reasons is that not a lot of people are going into the trades. And as someone that I've been in the industry now over a decade, I was a tradesman. I started as a framer and worked my way up, and now I'm on the management side for a large firm. Um, how do you think that we can get the next generations into trade schools, or bringing trade schools back, and incentivizing a workforce to go back into the industry?
This is where I really found my home in Idaho politics, I think. And because as soon as I started as a candidate, the first thing I did is I reached out to Idaho's unions, like specifically like the AFL-CIO. So even from day dot, the very first thing I did was work with Idaho unions, even though it wasn't really a part of my platform at first. Because if you want to understand the industry and the reality of what's happening, working with us on the ground and in the unions is the best way to do it. And for me, I think it's a problem because we have to address all of these different areas. First, we're cutting all of these subsidies and grants that were originally meant to try and bolster the trades, like launch programs, things that we were using to try and help rural students go into high demand industries and high demand jobs and fields. Those are being cut first, which is incredibly frustrating. And then obviously Idaho is a right to work state, and even though we have such a large union membership, I mean there's like 176,000 AFL-CIO members in my state, and I think that's roughly like 75,000 in my district, which is a huge amount of people for a rural state. But then because we're right to work, I don't feel like unions really recognize their own strength and how much power that they have when they mobilize. It's difficult to get their membership out to their meetings and engaged at their, CLC picnics. And so for me, it's okay. We need to properly fund kind of trade schools, vocational trainings, and certifications needed that we want to get students into. But then on the other side of it, we just for the first time finally got a labor agreement in with the new Micron development that we were able to get because of the Chips and Science Act. So the Biden administration passed Chips and Science. Micron started like a $2 billion massive new job program in the state, one that was so large we actually struggled to find enough people to fill the jobs that were required. And it was an incredible bump, but it was also the first time we had a labor agreement in place. And so I think that needs to become the standard, especially when the federal government is in any way investing in these kinds of projects, so that when we have the jobs to support the students that we're putting into these trades. Yeah, I think it's multi-tiered. You have to support it from every angle to make sure that the jobs are there, that the education is there, that the support for the unions is there. But the biggest one is education opportunities. I think making sure we can get students into these fields. For me, it's hard because I see on both sides with the lack of education that is now available, the cuts in Pell Grants, the cuts in what's considered a high, like the funding there isn't there. And whether it's the trades or whether it's like the semiconductor industry and all of these national security jobs that we need, now students can't afford to go to college. Now they're scared because our student loans, like I still have student loans and I haven't even finished my degree yet. And now if I get 1 month behind, they're going to start garnishing the no wages that I get, so it's making sure that we have education available at little to no cost so that we can get people into these high demand, good paying, lucrative fields that then feed back into the community and the support system that we have, and making sure there are labor agreements in every single deal done through the government or the state to support those job fields.
We're a huge fan of an educated population. We think that an educated population makes a better society. And so one of the agreements we have within our group is for education for all. And we can pay for it by reallocating funds. Because we looked into other countries who do education for all and scaled it to what it would cost here. And, you said you're a data person, so the data is there to support at least two free years of higher education in this country for everybody. because we, as people that signed on the dotted line to get free education, just don't think that that should be the cost.
Yeah.
For education is, you know, like having to go to combat and ruining your mental health, like just to get educated, which don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, we don't want the military to be last option or a last resort because people don't have the resources to chase what they want in life another way. I want the military to be a choice that people can make because they feel like it's the best thing for them. Education is 100%. And this is one of the hardest parts of overcoming the language and how people are trying to think about free education or free is people expect it to be so expensive because they're already paying a tremendous amount in taxes. And that's another thing is we are paying an insane amount in taxes. We pay tax at every level. We pay tax federally. Like we pay an enormous amount of taxes and get none of the benefits that any other democracy in the West receives. It's just wild. So people have this idea that they're going to be charged twice what they are now to offer these programs. I still remember, I obviously, like, I grew up with a single mom. Like, my mom, I mean, that woman worked harder than anybody I've ever met in life to make sure I could go to debate tournaments or, you know, be in theater or go to baseball camp. Like, my mom sacrificed all of it. And I then married into a family where they had some wealth. Like, you know what I mean? The dad did very well. The pool. It was a family lifestyle than I'd ever seen in my life. I remember they were so angry at the fact that because I was low income, that there were more federal dollars available to me to go to college. They didn't think it was fair that their child had to pay to go to college. But then I look at what we're trying to offer, and it's to everyone. It's not just to me. Like the free 2 years of education is for everyone. So even well-to-do families don't have to pay $120,000 for their kids to get an associate's degree. You know what I mean? So it's trying to defend some of these harbored frustrations, economy that hasn't worked for anybody really in the last 30 years, and trying to get the infographics and data out there to show how reasonable and easy this actually is without increasing taxes on working families.
Do you do you support tax relief for the middle class?
Oh, big time. My husband always jokes that he says I'm never in more danger on the campaign trail than when I talk about wanting to tax the most monopolized corporate industries and military contractors in the country. Yes, I am talking about cutting the tax rate on anybody making under, and I'm talking like $150,000, $250,000 and less. Specifically that $50,000 to like $120,000 range, where you're seeing people who should make enough to survive, but they're taxed so heavily and everything is so expensive. Even though making a decent salary, it's still everything is incredibly difficult. So I'm talking about slashing those tax rates for those brackets and then recouping that at the very top. And I think we can recoup a lot of that, not just in taxing the 1%, but then also in closing those loopholes and havens where a lot of that wealth is then stored away so that isn't taxed. And I always think about the $50 trillion that has moved from our local economies to the top 1%. If that had been in the local economies, that's getting taxed at what, like 25 to 30%. So it's basically the federal government has been robbed, and our institutions and our education and our healthcare, our local economies have been robbed for nearly 5 decades. So yes, huge economic reforms specifically targeting lower and working class tax brackets.
Yeah, you do see, I make decent money, right, doing what I do, and I watch people that make way less than me, like struggle, and I worry on like the cost of things rising, of how, fixed income individuals, especially veterans who live off of their disability income of how they are going to continue to afford, rent and food and electric things of that nature. Because I think that we have a system, like you've said, that we have rewarded the top 1% for decades, and it just really has not trickled down, right? Trickle down economics does not work. So what's your view on the federal minimum wage?
I feel like sometimes I wish I could bump it higher. And this is one where I'm not as comfortable with the inner workings of the data. So for me, of course, minimum, we need to raise it to at least $15 an hour. But the truth is if minimum wage was actually keeping up with inflation, then it should be $35 an hour. But then how do we raise the federal minimum wage that height without crushing small businesses, family farms, kind of smaller businesses at the local level that can't afford to pay that higher? So I think that's where we have to start getting into kind of more delicate, like, where do we implement this level? How do we protect and regulate wages, especially with corporations and national interests, without crushing small businesses, mom and pop, and the local kind of economy businesses? But yeah, I mean, I'm literally a radical labor candidate. So for me, like, that's 100%. I am always going to go for this. And I think it's also something I carry with me, because, like, when we had my daughter 13 years ago, we were like looking in the couch cushions for enough change to get like a gas station soda, right? Like, my husband was saving every single dollar. I still remember we were losing the place we were staying at when we first found out I was pregnant. My husband worked every day. Like, we saved every dollar. We got just enough to put down a deposit on a 400 square foot studio apartment. And then our apartment got robbed and they took all of our cash. And that's how we ended up then moving out into the house that I grew up in, out off of Homer Road. And at the time, my mom had gotten a divorce. She was struggling. So we helped my mom pay the mortgage. We got to live in the house that I grew up in. Then my mom got married. And so now we just took over the house. So we paid the mortgage. So for look at it, and if you looked at any other candidate in the country, I probably make less than all of them. But I also know that I have a tremendous amount of privilege in that, one, my husband works 6 or 7 days a week, and we have enough to take care of our kids. And a lot of it is because we have affordable housing. Because we, you know what I mean? I don't have to go try and find a place to rent with 3 months down, and rent increases every 6 months, and a fixed mortgage rate. And thank goodness my mom, like, literally the most responsible woman in the world. So she so I'm very privileged in the fact that I even have the opportunity to be in the lower tax bracket that I am in, but then still have the opportunity to run a campaign 24/7 because my family's able to make it without me having an income. So yeah, it's trying to balance that. My advocacy for these people, I feel that way because I do feel like I have enough privilege to be able to be in this position to fight for those issues that impacted me and my husband and my kids and my mom all so much our entire lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard you talk about it earlier about like attracting jobs and better paying jobs, especially if we're gonna, raise the minimum wage in small companies. So, how do you attract and keep good paying jobs in Idaho?
We break up monopolized industries. That's a big issue. And especially in Idaho, we just dealt with this over the last 2 years with the Kroger-Albertson merger, which, I mean, we're seeing an illusion of choice. So even many of the companies that we do have across the nation all have the same parent companies. So you have these monopolies, these conglomerates that push out any competitors that would be competing with paying higher wages or competing with lower prices for consumers. And it just destroys everything. So for me, like, I wish legislation was a more popular thing in political talks. Like, I wish I could run on that alone and just run commercials and people knew exactly what I was talking about. Because I do think it would address so many of the problems that we face. So for me, it's how do we break up these monopolized industries? How do we ensure that there's enough competition? How do we ensure that when we allow these businesses into our state that we require the kind of agreements. Like one of the things that I see is rural areas being so desperate to have anybody come in that they sell out labor and property and the impact that these corporations have on our local communities without expecting them to pay any of the impact fees, or expecting these corporations to rebuild some of the local infrastructure to support the local economy and students in education. And so for me, it's that balance, right? I want to break up the monopolies. I want to ensure that any industry that we're allowing into the state of Idaho or in at the federal level has some level of accountability for their impact on the infrastructure, on the economy, on the environment, on the, and also it's such a weird, I've learned in the last 4 years, when I talk about working class issues, the first year I was running, I didn't realize when I said that small business owners and entrepreneurs and mom and pop shops didn't include themselves when in that conversation. And which is really unusual for me. So I would have small businesses come out and talk about how hard the regulatory burden is on them already and how hard the tax burden is on them already. And so I've been very, very vocal about the fact that they are included in this conversation. I don't consider them the top 1%. Like they consider themselves the top 1%, but I'm including them in this, where we can relieve that regulatory burden. We can relieve that tax burden on small business to allow some competition back into these markets, to allow the opportunities for better paying jobs, while then crushing some of these corporate monopolies that have no soul and no accountability for their impact in our communities.
It's funny that you say that about like monopolies, right? So I was out at a action today here in Jacksonville, and we had a counter protester. And I always talk policy. I'll talk policy for hours. And we were talking about oligarchy. And he was a firm believer for some reason that we should just let the top 1% have all the money, because the only way to bring back manufacturing jobs to this country is to have people with enough wealth to start them. And I had never really heard that argument as like an actual debate argument when we're talking about policy and like doing away with monopolies and of the such. So there is the belief, unfortunately, within population of this country that the oligarchy should continue. But I am also a small business owner. I am a licensed plumber, and the regulatory system in this country is a bit much, especially for small businesses, especially for trade businesses, to get like licensed plumbers and licensed electricians and things of that nature. When you are doing it as a one-woman show, it was such an arduous process to get licensed in the state of Florida. And you know, like being a small business owner and going up against like these large conglomerates where it's like this one large business that is buying up all these smaller plumbing companies, and then we're competing against them. I do think if you can't break up the monopolies as a small business owner, like an ask or like a, hey, this is probably a good idea, is when one large company owns like a bunch of smaller trade companies, they should have to tell you that.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where, and this is a really good point, because in a state like Idaho, where Idaho prides itself on being the wild, wild west, I mean, they continue to slash any kind of licensing or permitting or regulations, which for a lot of small businesses that deal with these burdens all the time sounds great. But really what they're doing is they're slashing like the safety regulations, slashing the training and education requirements for licensing. So what we have in Idaho, I just panicked because we lost all water in my house, and we have a well. And so all of a sudden I had no water in my house, and my toilets sounded like they were haunted. And so of course I called my local plumbers and pipe fitters union. I was like, do you have a residential guy? And he came out, and I was worried we were going to have to replace the well pump, which is a whole excavation job. It's crushing expensive. It would have wiped us out for like the savings that we've been doing for like the last 5 years. And he came out, it turned out to be like a $70 pressure tank. Like it was a small fix, but then he was telling me about he's getting all of these customers who are going with a cheaper contractor and they're getting scammed because there's no licensing requirements. There's no kind of border oversight. And so now we've seen it in construction jobs. We've seen it in plumbers and pipe fitters. We've seen it in all these contractors where consumers are getting scammed because they're allowed to operate a business with absolutely no education, licensing, or background. So it's how do we balance that conversation? So it's trying to be really specific with the way I talk about it, which is I can understand that at the same time, small businesses are struggling under this regulatory burden, under the cost of all of these burdens, under the time. We can also relieve that burden while making sure that consumers are protected and that safety expectations of these really important trades are respected at the same time.
I will say this, like just hearing people get scammed, right, by people that work in my industry, like just gets my blood pressure. Like it makes it shoot it through the roof. Because one of the reasons I love being in the construction industry is I am clearly autistic and I'm very black and white with ethics, right? And I think, especially in Florida, it happens a lot after hurricane season where we have a lot of out-of-state contractors come to the state to help. And then they are scamming, you know, the elderly and veterans and single mothers out of insurance money. And to hear Idaho doesn't have the state restrictions. All right. I like the restrictions on my licensing in Florida because at least here you have to like have a license to do any of those trades. You're not just it's not the Wild West.
And our unions are fighting, and that's what I really love, is our unions are fighting really hard to try and maintain the integrity. But it is just, it's something I experience when I work with our unions, and it's something I experience when I work with our veterans. I think it's why I enjoy my job so much, and it's a running joke between my husband and I, because obviously I'm a young blonde woman. I have a very young voice. I know my friends joke that I have the Miss Rachel of politics voice. So I have dealt with disrespect or people being untoward or, you know, demeaning or condescending or belittling or inappropriate my whole campaign, right? It's something I deal with all the time. I have never once experienced it with my unions. I have never once experienced it with the veterans that I work with. Don't get me wrong, we work on each other and like we mess with each other all the time, but I have never dealt with disrespect or condescension. I have always felt safe and respected in these communities that I work with. And then it makes me want to fight even harder, realizing that they don't get the platform that they deserve, considering that they really are on the front lines of trying to take care of their communities. And so I consider myself very lucky that I get to work within these and work within these groups. And I know my husband and I always joke because my union guys give me such a hard time, especially when it's union day. I'm terrible at golf. So when they have their golf tournament, I sell the drinks off of the golf cart so that I don't hold up their golf games. So we always have a good time, but yeah, it's the respect. And I think it's something that's just very, very present in these communities. We know how to give each other a hard time, but there's also such an incredible amount of respect and integrity in how we treat each other and the way that we behave and what we do for our communities that I feel really lucky. It makes my journey into politics way better experience. Even when I have a rough day with somebody awful, I can go and I get to work for these incredible organizations and not deal with that.
Yeah. You know, many people watching who are veterans understand that most of us try to live up to like the warrior ethos. I'm prior Army. And so integrity matters. And I know that there are veterans across the country that are skeptical right now of non-veteran candidates. I didn't think it was an issue, but apparently it's a niche issue within our community. So what would you say to someone like me who's a vet, who is skeptical? I am not skeptical of civilians, but if I was skeptical of civilians at this time with what's going on in the country today, and the leadership we see, what would you say to a veteran like that about voting for you?
I get it 100%, because now that I've been running this campaign, I also see, like we were talking about, it's that lack of responsibility or obligation or weight that you feel when you are in these very important roles. So I can understand the mistrust in a system when we've dealt with this for 30 to 40 years. There hasn't been many elected officials that take that oath seriously or take that responsibility seriously. What I tell the people across my state is that there are ways to check to see if there are ways to check and see whether or not a candidate has a reason to be disingenuous. First of all, how open and transparent they are with their finances, who they take money from, how much work that they're actually putting in, their reputation behind the scenes. I know every candidate that runs across my state. I know the ones that show up, whether they're in front of the cameras or not. I know the ones that treat their campaign staff well and the ones who don't. So the relationships that candidates have with their communities, how transparent they are, how much work that they're putting in, how much they're gaining out of their campaign, because there are people that try and like roll their political campaign into lucrative job opportunities. There's no way, especially on a computer screen, after an hour and a half of talking, there's no way that I can get someone to trust me 100%. But there are ways, hopefully, that there are ways of identifying whether or not somebody has something that makes them more or less trustworthy. And my hope is that I can prove I'm trustworthy through my actions and through the legislation I support and through my commitment to this campaign and through the way that I operate myself in this campaign. And just hopefully putting the amount of work. I hope that I put in enough work to that, what's the word I'm looking for, to earn the support that I get. My hope is that I can put enough work in that I've earned the support or trust of people in my district and across the country that hopefully I get to advocate for.
How do you think you avoid becoming the kind of like politicians people criticize? Like, what do you think that looks like? How do you avoid becoming like these? I'll say this, my congressional person is Aaron Bean, and he is not controversial, but he also doesn't do his job. All right, like he doesn't earmark stuff for Jacksonville. He doesn't write pieces of legislation. And so I criticize him on those points because that's what matters to me. I pay you to legislate and you're not. So how do you think you avoid becoming, a politician that people criticize?
I think there's a couple ways. First, I've lived off of very little money in my life and been very happy. So for me, when I look at the congressional salary by itself, $174,000 a year plus healthcare and travel and expenses, that to me is lifetime money. Like that to me is more money than I ever expected to make on my own in my lifetime. So for me, I don't need any other financial interests outside of that. You know what I mean? It's very easy to cut myself off and say that's enough. Like me and my husband are happy right now without that income. So I think it stems to when I started, because when I started as, a 33-year-old working class candidate, I was trying to be something I wasn't to try and fit into a political system that I thought I was supposed to fit into. I didn't think I had the pedigree or the status or I was professional before I had to. And then I realized that it's the politics status quo that has broken everything. Like, this political system doesn't work. The way that we're doing it doesn't work. This handshake deals, the being professional in front of cameras, being careful with your language, it doesn't work for us, the working class communities, the people that need representation. And I'm really grateful for that lesson early on in the campaign. And I'm more grateful for the fact that I don't rely on any resources or support from people within the system. So I keep myself very intentionally outside of any of those resources. I don't take money or any support from anybody and try and leverage that after I'm elected. So I love that because I know what my communities need. I can be as vocal, I can advocate as hard as humanly possible, and there's nothing they can take away from me because I've been doing this without their support. We've created a grassroots community and a way of doing politics that doesn't require $1 to $3 million for the support of the DNC. Yeah, so I think it's a mix of knowing that I can take care of myself and my family with way less than the congressional annual salary and be happy and healthy. And then also knowing that the thing I'm most proud about in this campaign has been how radically outside of the system we are, but how much respect and coalition we've built despite that. And I think that's the way we need to be doing politics going forward. And I am really almost grateful for my, tough times in life, the things that I faced, the traumas, the violence, the weak, violent men that I've dealt with in life, because I think it puts me up for being up for the fight. I'm not somebody who's easily intimidated. I'm not somebody who's easily bogged down. I think that I'm up for this fight, and I know how to do it in a way that builds coalition and respect while we dismantle systems that don't work for everyday people. And that's how I know that I can stay outside of a system of corruption that has gotten us into this position in the first place. And I think I can bring more people into this circle. Like, I knew when I started 3 cycles ago, there was only a handful of us, younger working class candidates that were running for office. There was only like 3 or 4 of us who were working in rural districts. And so I started doing local candidate training and how to talk to rural, and like we started building these networks of people who are interested in running, who were younger and working class and came from, a veterans background and not a political background. And we all created a network where we gave each other advice and resources and support. And I had to do a lot of trial by error, where now the new people we're bringing into the race, who all are part of our working class movement of doing things differently, now they don't have to make the same mistakes. They get to learn from what we've learned from. And we build this coalition so that when I go back to DC, it's not just me up against this giant immovable wall of corruption. It's a coalition of other people who are as committed to this cause as I am. And together we can bring down the system that doesn't work for us anymore. So yeah, that's how I hope to do it.
Yeah, I think building power through smaller candidates matters, right? When I was on the stage on 11/22 in DC, and we saw a bunch of candidates. There were veterans and non-veterans on stage. From a strategist standpoint, I would love to see more smaller candidates come out with policy of like, hey, if you elect all of us, this is how we're going to affect change. Because as policy nerd, right? Like, I think politicians in general do a really great job of like, we're going to change this. But as my policy nerd kicks in, I'm like, how? Like, how? And how are you going to pay for it? So I'm glad to hear that you are building that coalition. I think more of that matters, of small grassroots campaigns across the country. And you've emphasized civility and working together. How realistic do you think bipartisanship is right now after the next election?
It's interesting. This has been a big issue in Idaho since I started, right? Idaho is really unique in that we have attracted for years redoubt movement, Christian nationalist movements, white supremacy movements, neo-Nazi movements, anti-government militias. There are areas of my state where I know I am not going to drive down certain roads because they're a training ground. Like, That is a very, very real issue in my state that we deal with at the local communities. And I'm almost grateful that my first experience as a candidate was up against some of these groups. And I have spoken out publicly against these groups. I've lit up Telegram with my name, and I've gotten the threats that come along with that. And I got this question a lot when I started talking back in 2022, like, well, how do you plan to work with somebody like, at the time it was Marjorie Taylor Greene, but like, let's use Pete Hegseth today. And I said, I want to work with well-intentioned people who take their oaths seriously. I am not going to work with somebody who's actively trying to dismantle the constitutional frameworks in the country and in the government that I love. Like, I'm not going to work with people who are not in this for the right reason. And so it's learning how to build a coalition of people who have integrity. And like, for me, that's the Problem Solvers Caucus. Ironically, a lot of times the candidates we don't hear about because they're not super edgy, you know, they're not rage baiting and they're not hitting the algorithms, but they are trying to pass legislation back in DC. And so for me, that's it, especially when it comes to my rural communities. Like, when I go into these areas and there are Trump supporters or people who are supporting ICE right now, I don't blame this guy who's making $30,000 a year in a tiny rural community where no progressive or Democrat has shown up to help him in any way, shape, or form for the last 30 years. So I'm not blaming him, and I also understand why he believes the way that he does. So what I do is I try and build a relationship and trust and consistency with that constituent, and then we can work on the policy together. And so when I have people who are, there's a lot of anger and righteous anger in my district on both sides. And so I try and validate that anger and that frustration and then find a way forward together. But I tell my communities all the time, like, stop lashing out at your neighbor, because your neighbor is not responsible for the status quo. Like, they are not in a position of power or a position of authority in making decisions over your life. We need to start punching up the people who actually hold that power. So that's elected officials, that's elected congressmen, you know, that's people like Russ Fulcher, that's people who are in positions of power and privilege that know exactly what they are doing and they abuse it for their own benefit. Those are the people that I refuse to work with, and those are the people that I look forward to holding accountable. People who wear a mask and claim to be an ICE agent despite having absolutely no training, who are murdering American citizens in the streets of Minneapolis, I'm not going to work with those individuals. I'm going to hold those individuals accountable. I want justice, but I will work with the people in the communities who have been taken advantage of and who just don't know who to trust. I don't blame them for that.
I think me and you will agree to disagree on that, just because I do blame the $30,000 worker in your area that is cheering on ICE, unless they have no moral compass, or have no access to the greater internet. Just because, and I'll say it this way, right, is like I stated earlier, like, I come from a very conservative family. I have family members that are like very MAGA, and I blame them too, right? We watch the same video, like, and the fact is they just have a different perception of reality, right? Like, I can't wait to ask my mom her opinion on the person murdered today, right? I can't wait to have that conversation. But I do blame the lack of empathy, right? As we all learned Liam's name. And the other side of that argument was, well, you know, the parents were undocumented. Who gives a fuck? It's a 5-year-old child. And so I do believe that there is some accountability to be had for the $30,000 worker that is standing on the side of the road cheering on ICE as well. But that is a personal business of mine. And so, you know, I think holding everybody accountable at this point in our timeline is important, and I'll explain why. I believe, as the granddaughter of a World War II vet that liberated a concentration camp and is now 2 generations removed from the Nazis, that we have the same fascist ideology in our streets today, and we did not hold enough people accountable during Nuremberg, obviously, because the ideology is here less than 100 years later. And so I am like you, I will always have those conversations with people, right, that are cheering on ICE and trying to be like, why? Why are you okay with children being kidnapped or civilians being murdered? Or like, why are you okay with this? And the general consensus is always the same of like, well, they're undocumented. And I don't think anybody is that uneducated in this country to realize that we have entire industries that are upheld by immigrant labor. And so I want that person held accountable too if they are cheering on the dismantling of our Constitution and like a secret police force snatching people.
I can understand, because I get the anger, right? Like, I experience the frustration and the anger. And for me, I try and intellectualize it and rationalize it, because to me, it's like a problem I want to fix. Like, how do I fix this so these people aren't supporting this kind of behavior anymore? It doesn't mean that I'm not infuriated. And especially when I watch people who claim to be just average Joes, but are intentionally propagating this kind of misinformation to stir hate in my communities. Like, I know that there are elected officials in the state of Idaho who were at a church service Sunday trying to recruit people to a neo-Nazi militia. Like, these are organized. Yes, it is very organized in my state. Oh yeah, no, it's a very legitimate problem, and it's hard because, for 4 years we're talking about, hey, you guys, there are active white supremacy militias, like there are active neo-Nazis who are in positions of power, and it was, no, you're exaggerating, or you're leftist just because they're on the right. And it was kind of that diatribe. For me, a lot of my academic background before I started the campaign was in state-sponsored misinformation efforts, especially through areas like Russia, the Internet Research Agency, the election interference in 2016, and not just Russia's state-sponsored misinformation campaigns, but then how that was used through American media and algorithms and tech bros, and how that they're kind of circulating these. So a lot of times when I talk to communities, like rural communities, and these are people who are not active with the system, the way that they're talking about issues are ways that it's being framed. Like, they believe these videos coming out, like the one with Renee Nicole Good, where they sped it up to make it look like she hit the agent. They sped it up so it looked like he got thrown. And then they cut the clip. And so that's all that they see. And that's all that they're hearing, because often they're listening to AM radio for 5 minutes in the morning. And, for like an hour after, they're listening to Tucker Carlson, whatever Fox, news hosts at the end of the day. So yeah, it is. I 100% agree with you, because there is accountability to be had. We talk about this all the time, especially there was post World War II. We always talk about it like it was a European issue, but fascism spread through the US. Like, you had Henry Ford buying local newspapers to spread the blood libel conspiracy. Right? And you had QAnon, who literally word for word just regurgitated the blood libel conspiracy with Hollywood elites and Democrats. And I look at the Civil Rights Act in 1964, only 19% of American population thought that the Civil Rights Act should be strictly enforced. Only 19% of the public actively supported civil rights. Like, this has just been a simmering issue. And so I don't think I can single-handedly fix it, but I hope to be as aware of it as I can, and to try and have as much evidence. And I can at least promise that I will bring down a hammer of justice on any elected official or any person actively culpable in these situations. My husband tries to comfort me at the end of really bad days by saying, maybe when you're elected, you'll get to oversee their trials. And that's kind of how I try and get through some of these days, especially weekends like this.
Yeah. Because we're in a chat with veterans cross country, and these are scary times, right? Even as veterans, like I have a lot of civilian friends. I organize with a lot of civilians in the city, and they're nervous, and I know they're nervous, right? Because they ask me things all the time. But veterans around the country are nervous, right? Like we are seeing what's happening and being like, yeah, this is weird. This shouldn't happen here when you have ICE agents that have 47 days of training, then are in gear that I wore in the military with weapons that I used in the military because of the 1033 program. They have the same military equipment, and they're now in the streets. And I watched a video recently of an older veteran saying that he couldn't tell the difference between ISIS and ICE. And he explained he was in Iraq. And I want to speak directly to veterans cross country right now, because I know we're coming up on the end of time. I am a veteran that is out in the streets that is documenting ICE in my area for accountability, for trying to get names of people being kidnapped by the federal government and documenting. And I know veterans cross country are doing the same. But please check in on your mental health as you do this, because I do know it is traumatic for a lot of us. So please take the time to talk to somebody, reach out to other veterans doing the work and taking breaks outside of the work to recoup. We're in it for the long haul, and our civilian counterparts need us, and we're built for deployments. And so we do get R&R on deployments. So please take your R&R and check in on your mental health, especially if you are in Minnesota, Memphis, any of the hotspots, Charlotte, like North Carolina, Atlanta, Jacksonville, Florida in general is a shit show. But anywhere around the country, please take care of your mental health. But it has been a pleasure talking to you. I hope we can connect more. Like I said, we do have somebody in the group that lives in your district. And so I always reach out to people that are running, especially for people that are within our group specifically. I find all of your work extremely fascinating, and I hope, and I'll put in the vibe, that you get elected and that we get to see the accountability that you want, because we believe in the same accountability of the government. Please, so we close out in a kind of weird fashion because you're not a vet, so you're not going to know what's about to happen. But before we do that, can you tell us how to get involved, your next steps, where to donate money, and things of that nature?
Yeah, so the good news is I am the only Kaylee running for Congress in the United States of America. So I'm really easy to find. Literally, it's Kaylee for Congress, all spelled out, FOR Congress. So for the veteran in my district, if they want to send me an email, they can just email me at kayleeforcongress@gmail.com. That goes directly to me. All my social medias, Kaylee for Congress. If you message me there, it all goes directly to me. So I would love to hear from you. Obviously, donations are huge, but it's 2026 and not everybody has financial resources. I like to say, ironically, some of the biggest donations I get are because somebody has a relative or a friend that does have quite a bit of financial resources. And they've been like, hey, you should check out Kaylee, and give me a call, and I'll get thrilled interview style and see if they're willing to contribute to the campaign. But introductions are a huge part of building our community. So for anybody that thinks there's somebody in Idaho that I should be talking to, somebody that knows a community or an organization that does work in my district, I would love to hear from them. Or just connecting with me on social media, something as simple as sharing a social media video, if you agree with it, is incredibly helpful. But also right now, like you said, things are really, really difficult. So taking care of yourself, connecting, and sometimes we just have to disconnect and be with people that we trust in person and spend time doing like D&D or games that we enjoy or watching one of our favorite movies with like a stiff drink. So yeah, I hope that politics in whatever way that you're doing it builds community for you. And if I can ever be of help or support or in any way contribute, just reach out to me and I'll be there in a jiffy.
Well, we are part of the shindig that's happening in DC on 2/28, the March for Democracy. And so everybody we have on this in the smoke pit, I invite formally to come to DC with us on 2/27 and 2/28. It is put on by us, Fight Against Fascism org, and a bunch of other organizations across the country. So this is your formal invitation to that event. So we close out with a safety brief. If you've never heard of this, every Friday at close of business, NCOs give a safety brief. It's normally your first sergeant. And what it is your leadership gently reminding you not to be a degenerate over the weekend. And so we do one every time that we do a smoke pit, whether it's with a candidate or it's with a group of vets just shooting the shit. So we always started out the same way. Do not beat your spouse, your child, or your pet, or random animals in general. Do drink water. Make sure you're eating. Take all of your medicine and make all of your therapy appointments. Reach out before you crash out. I am sober, and if you cannot afford an Uber, please do not drink and drive. Message any of our social medias. I will personally pay for your Uber home. Also, do not buy zoo animals on the black market and then try to donate them to zoos. It does not work out in your favor. Also, do not conduct live fire exercises in housing. Things to do. So as veterans, we took an oath to the Constitution of the United States and the people of this country. Please protect the most vulnerable. We see civilians being shot and killed across this country. We see children being abducted, and we see civilians at risk now more than ever. As a veteran organization, we have always advocated for veterans to protect our communities. And so we are asking for veterans to stand up for your oath and protect the most vulnerable around you in a time where our citizens are terrified of the federal government, and it shouldn't be a party issue. We took an oath to the Constitution, and so that is one. And Rory, I see you came off. Did I miss it?
No, but we have some added ones. But to caveat off of what you just said, we have to remain, or we don't have to, but everybody remain nonviolent. Cool this shit down. The shit's too wild. It's not the wild, wild west. We're not cowboys no more. All right. And then leash your fucking dogs, or get better fences, please. Sorry for my aggressiveness. We just lost a pet to loose animals. And then
for anyone in this cold, try and stay warm. And if you have outside pets, try and either keep them warm or bring them inside.
And Rory, you're one you say every time. Don't forget to change your socks.
Oh yeah, change your socks. Drink water. Take some ibuprofen.
And another one that I will start adding to my male veteran counterparts that do this work. I want to thank you for your accountability that happens within this week. If you know what I'm talking about, you will know what happens, and then you will know the accountability I'm talking about. So I want, as part of our safety brief, to remind everybody in the veteran community to police your fucking battle buddies. When behavior that is not acceptable happens within this community, it is upon this community to police their own, to gain and keep the trust of the people that look up to us. And so I want to thank each and every one of you, and it was all men that stood up and outed a predator among us very publicly in support of the victims. And so I want to say thank you, and please continue to police your own your battle buddies in your spaces. There is no room for predatory behavior ever, but especially at this time. We will not deal with it. So I do want to thank everybody for calling it out very publicly. Kaylee, do you have any fun safety briefs for us?
I think you covered all the big ones. I mean, exotic pets are a big. Drinking water is probably a big one. I am really, really bad at that. My husband sometimes survive. So maybe drink a little less soda and drink a little more water. And do not stay up all night watching your favorite television show. Get to bed at a decent time. And don't hit snooze many times in the morning. Like, just wake up at one time. That's about all I can think of.
Too many times.
Otherwise, I'd be a hypocrite.
That is a good one. Get enough sleep. With everything going on, I know that we are addicted to staying up what is happening with our comrades in Minneapolis and in other cities, especially as a national veteran organization. We have people that live in Germany. Get enough sleep, especially if you're in therapy and trying to fix your shit. Part of your therapy is getting enough sleep. So commit to that.
There is a protest.
What?
Self-care is a protest.
Oh, I missed that. I thought you said something about a protest. I was like, oh God.
Yeah, self-care is a protest.
It is. And so, Kaylee, thank you for being on with us. I have enjoyed this. I am going to enjoy watching your campaign. And I know one of the things our group is doing is working on a way, it's not really an endorsement, but it's like a commitment to like some of the things that we would like to see, especially within the veteran community. And so when that is solidified, I will send it over to you. But I will connect our Idaho veteran to you. I'm sure he's watching. So thank you for being here, and, keep up the good fight. I know it's got to be difficult in a deeply red district. I live in the dystopian nightmare known as Florida. And so I get it, and I commend your fight.
Thank you so much for the time tonight. It was really great getting to meet, and I look forward to doing our work in tandem in whatever ways we may cross. So thank you for the time, and I appreciate you. We joke actually Idaho's trying to be the next Florida. So Idaho's desperately trying to be as southern Florida as possible. So we're in it together. Thank you so much. Have a good night, you guys.
Good luck with that. I always tell people that Trump made America Florida.
It's so true.
Yeah.
That's right.
So true.
All right. Well, good night, everybody. Please stay safe. Everybody check in with your loved ones, especially if you're going out protesting what is going on. Especially to veterans that are watching this that know, bring a battle buddy, check in with a battle buddy, do all the correct safety procedures, and keep those around you safe, because these are very uneasy times. So good night, everyone.
And then good night, everyone.
Night.